Hi everyone, welcome back to Ilum Sabers. Today's video is one that I've been looking forward to getting into for a while, and I finally got the opportunity to dig into it a little bit. So without too much, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the vintage Graflex that we'll be going over today. This is the only vintage Graflex I have ever held, and I'm very pleased with how it feels in hand. Up until now, I had only seen and held replicas, and replicas that weren't too terribly accurate at that. So I will do kind of a comparison video at some point between that and this Force FX that I have converted and installed. They're pretty similar overall. I mean, the vintage Graflex is a little thinner, you can tell, but pretty close overall. So I'll do a comparison at a point in time in the future, just kind of going over some of the things that they got pretty close, some of the things they didn't. For example, obviously the width of the hilt. But you know, at this point, I just want to go over the Graflex itself, kind of how it breaks down, some more information about this particular Graflex and some of the other Graflexes out there, and really just get a good kind of informational video on these out there. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to the desk cam, and then I will get back with you. All right, so I've gone ahead and switched to the desk cam, and you might be thinking, wow, what is all of this stuff? So briefly kind of going over this stuff. This, of course, is the Graflex flash handle. This is what Luke uses as his lightsaber in the original trilogy, the first two films. But you might have noticed I called this a flash handle. So this is a piece of camera equipment, for those of you who aren't familiar. And this is the flash disc that goes in the upper portion. So this slides in here like this. You've got a light bulb that sits in here, and essentially then the photographer would press a button on the camera. You'd get a flash from the bulb, you know, into the dish, and that is how they used to do flash photography. So the actual flash gun handle is this piece, and that's what they used for the lightsaber. And then these are other pieces of the equipment that would go with it. If you were actually using it for photography, you would be using these as well. So I'll set this to the side for now. Very, very cool to have the full flash setup. But the actual flash handle is what we're most interested in, because of that is, of course, the lightsaber that Luke uses. So you'll notice, kind of right off the bat, it basically already looks exactly like the lightsaber that Luke uses. There aren't a lot of modifications that they made. For the most part, they just added grips and a clamp card. And that's really all that they did. The prop team went out, found some of these, which by the time of the 1970s were dirt cheap. They were probably in, you know, clearance bins or dumpsters at camera shops. They couldn't get rid of them. I mean, you'd have to almost pay somebody to take them at that time, because the technology had passed, and these were obsolete as camera units, and so nobody was using these. The prop team went out, thought this looked kind of cool, like it might look like some kind of a sci-fi prop or laser sword, and the rest is history, right? And now these things are, instead of being considered obsolete camera equipment, they're considered high-value collector's items. Not just by the lightsaber community, but by the vintage camera community as well, which is another reason why a lot of people really prefer that you don't modify these with drilling any holes or any permanent changes or anything like that. This one is still completely original. I haven't changed anything. The only thing I have changed is this glass eye here. When I bought this flash, it did not come with a glass eye. The glass eye was missing. So I was able to get a vintage replacement. But nothing about this has been modified. I do plan on putting some grips on this at some point, but I think my plan was and remains to be that I will buy a replica bottom. That way I can do all the modifications I want and display this as a lightsaber without actually getting any kind of residue or drilling any holes in the bottom of the flash. And speaking of that, this is how you remove the bottom from the flash. So if I did that, I had a replica bottom, and I want to display this as a lightsaber, I flip the lever open, rotate the bottom, and then it just pulls out. Like that. So you can see that there is a notch here. So there are some notches on the inside of the clamp. See if I can kind of show those. There we go. You can kind of see that in there. Right where the square is, right here. Maybe I can get the light a little better. There we go. Yeah, so right here, there's a little notch right there on this side and on this side. If I hold it down like that, you can see them sticking out on both sides, there and there. So those notches that are in the clamp go here and here. Push it down, you twist, and then they lock in place. And that is how it holds in the upper section as well. If you look in there, you can see there's a bit of rust on the inside here. The clamp is steel, whereas the upper and lower of the flash are like I think a tin plate brass. It might not be tin plated, but it is like a plated brass. And then on the inside, you can see you've got these same notches here on the upper, and the clamp locks in that same way. So if you have one of these and you want to display it as a lightsaber without making any modifications, you can just remove the bottom half and buy or fabricate an accurate lower half. And then just as easy as you popped the one off, you would pop the new one on the same way. Slide it on, press and twist. Once you've got it in place, you push the clamp down, and the clamp, or the lever on the clamp, it pulls this together, makes the area smaller, compresses them together so that there's no movement. So that is a really cool way that they designed this. Of course, originally you would have done that to access the internal components, maybe the battery, change out the battery in here, or whatever. Now, we pretty much use it for how I described. You also, a lot of people will, you can tighten or loosen the clamp by, you can see there are some threads here. And so those threads will tighten or loosen the clamp at its tightest point when you flip the lever. So if you are pressure fitting a clamp card in there, either an ESB or in a New Hope card, or a Sequels card for that matter, you'll want to make sure you get the tension just right, because you don't want that card moving around in here. But that is the original purpose of it. As far as the flash itself, some of the ways you can tell that this is a vintage flash and not a replica, because the replicas are getting very good these days. The main tell is the pins here. Those little brass contact pins inside of there. Those are like a dulled color. They're brass, but they're not a bright yellow like brass is when it's new. So most, if not all, replicas that you'll see are going to have bright yellow brass pins. A great example of that is the Force FX conversion that I've got right here. You'll see that these pins are a bright yellow brass. And that is because they are relatively new. They haven't had time to oxidize. Whereas the vintage Graflex, this is from, the 1940s, 50s, plenty of time for oxidization to occur. So it actually looks more like a steel color almost than a brass color, just because it's so oxidized. So if someone is selling a vintage Graflex and it has bright yellow gold colored pins, that is definitely a red flag. At the very least, the pins are not vintage, but more than likely, the Graflex itself would also not be vintage. Turning around to the side here, you've got the two switches on the Graflex. So these would operate camera functions. This one, this red button, is a button. It pushes. In The Force Awakens, of course, we see Finn turn on the Skywalker saber by pressing this button, and then the blade shoots out. Canonically, the blade control is supposed to be the control box here. It's supposed to press or slide up and down, depending on what reference you're looking at. This one that I have installed, this conversion and install that I did, I actually have it slide up and down to turn on and off the blade. Canonically, that is correct, but in The Force Awakens, we do see the saber turned on with the red button. There's no real canonical use for this switch here, but this is a sliding switch. So this will slide up and down. And that sliding switch did have an actual function with the camera equipment, but the canonical function of this is either unknown or non-existent. Here, you'll see you can actually squeeze these bunny ears together to make the ring wider in order to fit your bulb. You also have the bulb contact in here. This is often depicted on replicas with, like here, you've got a blade plug that's got this, it's kind of a replica approximation of the bulb holder here. So this has actually become sort of a canonical piece of the saber. And it is on a spring, so you can push it up and down. And then the glass eye, if you remove this, there's a spring in here. So you want to be very careful when taking these out, because you don't want it to spring forward and spring out on you. So that is meant to hold in this little light bulb. So the little light bulb goes in, and then the glass eye is clear because the light bulb will light up. It's called a pilot light, and it is essentially my understanding is it's like a warning of the picture is about to be taken. So I normally don't keep the light bulb in there because it greatly increases the pressure on the spring, and I don't want to have anything popping out when I'm unscrewing this. And I would prefer to keep the tension on the spring a little less if possible. Moving along, you can see, of course, Graflex is written across the clamp, In A New Hope, they didn't do much about that, but in The Empire Strikes Back, you will see they used reflective tape to cover that up, although with the film quality and grain of everything, it probably didn't matter, but with the 4K editions that we have of the trilogy now, you might be able to see that lettering if they hadn't done that. Something you'll notice is that the lever here on the film prop is actually rotated 180 degrees, and you can do that fairly easily, but mine came in this configuration, and I believe most of them did. I think that the rotation was something done after the Graflex was actually used, but the lever orientation doesn't actually have any real effect on its use as a piece of camera equipment. Got a screw here to hold the clamp in place. This notch up here is actually for holding in the dish. So you can see, here's the dish. I turn it over. Got a bit of rust on the back here, but you can see this notch right here. So this notch is kind of springy, and when you slide this down into the top of the flash, or the emitter of the saber, whatever you want to call it, that little tab pushes into the square hole near the top of the shroud, and that is part of what holds the dish in place. Moving down just a little further, you'll notice on the bottom of the flash, this is designated as an ink. So this is a later production Graflex. It says, see if I can get the camera to focus. Manufactured by Graflex Incorporated, Rochester, New York. Graflex 3-cell, trademark, etc. So Graflex ink right here is a bit of a tell on the age of the Graflex. There are Graflex inks, there are Graflex Fulmers with patent, which just means at the bottom says Fulmer Graflex with patent, and then there's another one that has Fulmer Graflex and it does not have the extra verbiage about the patent. Those three tiers are each increasingly expensive. So the ink is the most common variant. The Fulmer is the next least common. And then the most least common of the general production Graflexes were the Fulmer with no patent. And there is a lot of debate about what kind of Graflexes were used in filming. We don't really have a ton of information about it. From the photos that we have, it seems like the general consensus is that there were Fulmers definitely used. It's possible that there were Graflex inks used as well in production, but we don't see a lot of evidence of them on screen. But we do know that Graflexes were used all over the place in filming, so it's really hard to tell. Another way you can tell, because down here you've got the verbiage about Graflex ink versus Fulmer, but there are other ways to tell. Some of those are that the glass eye is a little bit different on the ink versus the Fulmer, as well as the pins being smooth versus stepped pins. So you can see these pins have a little bit of a step on them. Older Fulmer pins will not have that. They'll just be smooth all the way down. So that is something to look for. Another way to kind of tell vintage versus replica, which is not always a perfect tell, but it is a tell, is the sort of knurling on these buttons. This is definitely an older button. You can see the knurling is worn by people turning it, pressing into the knurling as you turn it. A brand new button that was constructed like last year or 2019 or whatever is going to have really sharp knurling on it. So it definitely will not look worn, will not look used. So that is something to look for. And the same is true of the glass eye as well. A new glass eye will look too pristine. Most vintages are not that pristine. This vintage is in pretty good condition. You can see there's a little streak of wear there. And there are a few other small places on this, but overall it is pretty clean. Not a lot of rust, not a lot of wear in the plating. There's a little kind of mirror finish part right here where it looks like it's been rubbed against something, but the plating is still intact. So overall, this is a pretty clean example of an ink. I'm really happy with this. It's really interesting to hold a piece of that history in your hands and be able to really hold what they used. I mean, you can't get closer to a prop replica than a vintage because it's the exact same thing that they used. They just modified it somewhat with the grips and everything else. So in the future, I'm really excited to currently be working on a holiday special Graflex, and in the future I'd like to do kind of a comparison between those. They are both vintages, of course. No one has really made a replica run of the holiday special lightsaber, partially because it's such a niche saber, and partially because the vintages are relatively inexpensive still. So I'd like to do kind of a comparison between those in the coming months. So keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and pan across this a little bit and then switch back to the front-facing camera and do the outro. All right, thanks everybody for tuning in today. I really enjoyed talking about this vintage Graflex. Hopefully I can do some more content with this as time goes on. I'd like to, like I said, put some grips on the bottom, put a clamp card in the clamp or in the control box, and get it looking a little more like what you see in A New Hope on screen. So I'm excited to do that. Stay tuned for that because that shouldn't be too far in the future. That's a pretty simple project, pretty simple mod to make. Again, if you did want to do that, you wouldn't have to buy a whole separate bottom. If you wanted to have your Graflex look like A New Hope, you could. I've seen people do all of those modifications to the vintage bottom, and you can do all of that without drilling any holes. You can just use strong double-sided tape or E6000, things that won't damage the plating. But personally, I really want to be able to display it either clean as the camera flash or with the grips on it. I want to be able to do either way and have that be interchangeable and a quick thing to change. So there's really no better way to do that than just having two bottoms, so you can just pull it off and then grab your other one, put it on, and then you're done. So in the interest of doing that and keeping the bottom completely original, I'm not going to be adding grips to mine, but there are ways. If you weren't interested in displaying it like this, there are definitely ways, absolutely, of turning the bottom into the more accurate lightsaber handle with the grips and the D-ring and the little rivets toward the bottom. And you can just glue all of those little pieces on. You don't have to drill any holes. And that is the most popular way I have seen to convert this into sort of a display prop. So I would suggest doing that if you have a vintage or you're looking at getting one, just because, you know, the more holes you drill and things like that, there are only a limited number of these out there. We can't make more vintages. So if you're interested in drilling holes and making replicas that have those kind of markings and things on them, like the DV6 with the holes all through the top, or the ESB with the holes down here, or a New Hope with the actual rivets and things. I would suggest getting a replica hilt from the Graflex shop or from Roman Props. Both of those have extremely accurate Graflexes. For example, Roman Props actually had his Graflex used in Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. Lucasfilm bought one from him and used it on screen because that's just how close it is to a vintage. They didn't need to get vintages for that. They just used replicas that were created in the Saber community. So that's super cool. And again, just a reminder, if you do want to do those kind of more hardcore mods to the flash handle, I would recommend getting a replica. And on that same note, if you are looking to use a camera flash and you don't have access to a vintage, or you don't want to use a vintage because you don't want to put more wear and tear on it or whatever, the Graflex shop flash handles are completely accurate even with internal flash components. So you can actually use those as camera flashes. So it kind of goes both ways. They kind of service the Saber community and mostly the Saber community, but there is potential there for using them as real camera flashes as well. So while there are only a finite number of vintages in existence, there is someone still making camera flashes that are compatible, that are the same as these. So not to worry, the people drilling holes in the vintages and all of that aren't making it impossible for camera enthusiasts to use these. But like I said, I would prefer to keep pieces of history like this intact, so I won't be drilling any holes. And I recommend that you do some research into alternatives to drilling holes before you decide to drill holes. So thank you for tuning into the video, and until next time, may the Force be with you.